Hi and welcome to Tabletop Gaming. My name is Charlie and today we're going to be taking a look at some books. Now, I appreciate you saying in your head, you're going, Charlie, this is a board gaming channel. What is it that you're talking about books for? Well, it's because Aconyte Books have merged together the two passions. So now we have books that are set in the world of board games that we love. How fabulous. Now this started a little over a year ago with Fantasy Flight themed books. So what that means is we have things like Keyforge, we have things like Descent, we have things like Legend of the Five Rings. And these are the main things they're focusing around. Now, that's not to say they're not doing others, they are. There's a lot of Marvel based books that have come out too that you can check out. But for the purposes of this video, seeing as we are a board gaming channel, we're going to focus on the board gaming ones. We'll start in no particular order to you, but in fact the order that I read them. So we're starting off with Wrath of Aconyte. I thought this would be a safe bet, seeing as it was based on the Lovecraft books anyway. It should be a nice return back into book form for us to read, and I was right, I'd like to think. Now these are pulp books, so in the style of being like particularly shocking, in the style of being like easy books to get hold of. These are great fun to read for that reason. So in this one in particular, you have Countess Alessandra Zorzi, who is tasked with being an acquisitioner, which is a fancy way of saying a thief. She's tasked with stealing a mummy that appears in the university. However, when she gets there, someone else steals it first. So obviously, hilarity ensues. That's not hilarity, that's not the right word. Chaos ensues, as there appears to be a curse underway, as well as some strange murders happening all over town that seem to follow the path of the mummy. Now, this is great fun to read. It is quite surprising, I think. I wasn't expecting the ending, and that's quite unusual. I really enjoyed this, and I thought this is a really good start. This is a good way to break yourself into the Aconyte novel series. Now, following that one, we then headed over into Keyforge. Now, I don't know much about Keyforge in the sense that I've maybe played a game or two, but I'm not as in-depth in the lore, so I was a little bit worried that this one might be out of my reach. And luckily, I was very wrong. Now, unlike this one being a full novel with a single story and a single narrative, this is a collection of short stories. Now, these have been put together really, really nicely because you're looking at the Crucible, but you're looking all over the Crucible at different pockets of different information in different people's lives that are so varied that it really shows off the abilities and flexibilities of the world and the world that's been created within it, which is incredibly impressive. We start by trying to kill an Archon, then we move on to trying to be the best thief possible, then we move on to sort of more emotional aspects of the stories, and that's what really surprised me about this, is short stories can be a struggle, I find, because there's not enough time to get the narrative going, whereas these don't have that issue. They jump between stories, but each one makes you feel really involved in it in such a short period of time. So for example, it might be the girl that is trying to protect the robot that saved her life once upon a time. It's the last thing she had with her humans, but ends up finding something else to make it even better, to repay debts. So many layers. Then you move on to the healer in the forest who is lonely and misses his friends, but manages to find what is in theory a new friend who doesn't turn out to be quite so, but there's a nice twist at the end. There's a lot of heart in this book, and that really surprised me. I wasn't expecting to have an emotional reaction to it, which it did offer, and it did so really nicely. Each of them felt fully explored. By the end of it, I was happy to sort of leave their story there and move on to another. But the sheer difference in the stories is unreal. It's a new thing every time, and a new proof that the Crucible is as wide and as impressive as it's made out to be. Moving on then, of course, to our next one, which is in the Legend of the Five Rings universe. Again, it's a universe that I'm familiar with, but it's not my niche. You know, some people are like, I'm hugely into sort of the Japanese ninja style of stuff and I know everything about it. I am not that person at all. I played a couple of video games that are in that world and it's cool, but it's not my niche. So this worried me. As you can tell, I feel like I approached all of them with caution, and I think that's because there's a really emotional investment in the games that we play and the way that we react to those worlds, and putting them into a book makes the characters more real, which is a plus, but equally runs the risk of almost ruining it for you as well. And I think that's why I got so invested in what these books were going to be, but it's beautiful that they exist for that reason. But with that, this was not one that I thought I was going to love. I thought this was going to be like a battle book more so than anything else, and it was going to be sort of very male-dominated, very sort of war describe-y style, and I sort of veered away from it. I put off reading this one. Luckily, I was very wrong. So we start this book with Haru. Haru is desperate to prove himself worthy of the throne that he will one day inherit, but is ultimately a selfish and cowardly style character. There is little to nothing to endear you to him. And he is the lead character for about the first 100 pages. And in those 100 pages, I was just furious. This is everything that I said it wasn't going to be, but there was a really interesting tale of finding a city that is abandoned, that is creepy and distinct and strange, and he desperately wants to go back and reinvestigate it. And you really feel this connection of sort of, no, stop it, you're really annoying. However, the perspective does change, and it changes to that of Barako. Now they enter that city at the instruction of Haru, and something bad happens because it has to. It's a creepy abandoned city underground, hidden in like a cavern. It's gonna be creepy, something's gonna go wrong. And when they return back, that creepiness has inevitably followed them. So we swap perspective from focusing particularly on Haru to Baruko. Now she is the leader, or becomes the leader for various reasons, and she is a really engaging character. She is one that you want to cheer for and you're excited for, and it's a really nice contrast. Those 100 pages of Haru give you this beautiful contrast with Barako, and you fully understand her motivations because of what came before, so it's worth it. In that, they're then having to push back on those creatures. You can't tell who it is. They may have possessed someone, so you don't know whether that person is who they say they are, which makes it all the more difficult to work out what's going on. Now, I was worried about battle scenes. There are battle scenes. They are very nicely written though, in a sense that they don't go on for 500 pages, in which case you're sort of rolling your eyes or trying to work it out. There's a really emotional feel in them that invests you in them as well, and you're keen to see what happens next. Alongside that is a really intriguing political thread as to what's happening and who's accusing who and why, and what that then ends up with a nice twist at the end. I'm not gonna lie, I did see it coming, but it was worth it for the build-up anyway. And I think books, when you can anticipate their ending but still get there and still want to read ahead, that's a really good sign. So this one surprised me the most, and I think was potentially my favourite of the ones that I read across all 4 of them, which is quite a nice recommendation for a book that I really thought I wouldn't like. Then we come to the last one. This is set in the Descent universe, which is great because there is a new Descent game coming out later this year. Exciting stuff. I believe we've also got a trailer that you can check out on our channel too, so make sure you have a nosy. Now, this one sets up quite nicely. It's using 4 old retired heroes, to rescue a daughter who has gone missing of the Baroness. Now that's more important than it sounds. There's a big reward for it. They're all very excited about it. What you know though from the prologue, you know what's happened to the daughter, and it is not the political kidnapping that it's set up to be, and it's quite nice as you then sort of uncover more and more, and you learn more about the world and the magic that's within it, and it's interesting. However, I personally struggled with this one. This is, I think, the weakest of the 4, and I think the problem is, having been steadily more and more impressed by each of them, this one felt a little bit of a letdown. Now the reason why is because they're not as well thought out, I don't believe, or as well explored as these. Each of these you begin to have an emotional connection with the character, and you want to read what it is that they're doing, and you're invested in what they're saying. Even in the Crucible, which I said about being sort of the most they're short stories. You shouldn't be able to gain a connection that well as you do in those. There's nothing particularly endearing about the characters. Their interesting aspects aren't, I don't think, particularly well explored. So the things that make them them and make them more interesting are muted. We sort of have a look at them, but we could have done loads more with them. We just sort of didn't. And then we have things like the characters in there that are, I think the term is Mary Sue's, where they fulfill one role. They are there to say this at the right time, and then they come back in later and they are there to say this at the right time. And although the ending of it is perhaps more realistic, I'm gonna say, because I have this argument quite often, it feels a little bit like a cop-out. It feels like this was where it was always going to lead and there was no other way out of it. So I think this is the weakest of the 3 books, but still a good enough read. Like, one, I'd lend it out to a friend and be like, oh, you might like this, whereas these I'd be like, you need to read them right now. That's the difference between 4. Now, with that, there are plenty more, and what I like about these is there's more and more in the series, there's more and more coming out. These are only sort of the very first ones, to be honest. There's probably about 3 times as many by now, but they're generally authored differently. They chop and change with the authors as to who's doing what. So fair enough, I wasn't a fan of this one, but the next one in that world isn't written by the same person, so I can give it a try again. Now that's Pros and cons. I'd quite like to read another Arkham book written by Josh Reynolds. I think it would be great. I would quite like to read a follow-up to this one, The Curse of Honor, because I thought it was great, by the same person, David Landau. Now, a lot of these writers are sort of almost like ex-Warhammer writers or those sorts of things, so they come with a wealth of experience and I do want to read more of them. However, they're chopping and changing, so they're writing in different worlds, so I can then go and read Josh Reynolds in a different world, for example, which is exciting in itself because it's opening up new worlds and new stories to me as well. So is there a future for book fiction in board games? Yeah, absolutely. We spend all of this time creating incredible worlds and investing ourselves in them. You look at something like Everdell, for example, where there is history, there's reason for being there, there's characters, there's people that lead them into new places and give them new goals. In the instruction books, there's receipts for the general store. There are whole worlds that have been created, maps that make it beautiful. Wouldn't a story in that work beautifully well? I think this is capitalising on a really fun aspect of gaming adjacent spaces. Fanfiction's been around for a little while and arguably that's what this is, but in the best possible way, and I think it's been done really well. So in my mind, it's a thumbs up to Aconyte Books. A recommendation that you pick up some of these from your favourite board game worlds, but also the worlds that you wouldn't normally read, I would also recommend. I'm going to carry on reading these, so I'll give you an idea on what the next ones are like, and hopefully they will be as positive as these ones have been too. Let me know your thoughts. Which ones would you like to see turned into a book? So I've already said I'll turn Everdell into a book quite happily. Which worlds would you like to see? And have you read any of these? What did you think? Do you agree with me on some of them being good, on my less so feelings on the latter? What do you think? I would love to hear it because it means I get to talk about books and board games in the comments. So please do let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.